around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around, I get around, get around, round, round, 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 I get around.
My name is Maurice McDonald. I own these three Volkswagens. This particular one here is a 1971 Type 3. I purchased this new on November the 24th, 1971, so I've had it over 41 years. In fact, I used to pick up my wife on dates in this car. We'll be married in June for 40 years, so I've had this car a long time. This is a Survivor car. That's an unrestored original. That's the original paint. It doesn't have the original engine. I changed the engine back in 1988, but I still possess the original engine, so I could put it back in if I redo it. But everything about the car, or any of my cars, are stock. I leave them stock with very few exceptions, so this is no exception to that. The reason I bought a Type 3, I was in the Army in the late 60s in Germany, and so I got indoctrinated with Volkswagens. 2 weeks after I got out of the Army, I bought a Volkswagen, a Type 3, a 67 Type 3, and a couple of years later I bought this one. I was kind of drawn to the Type 3s because I like the way they were made. You could actually see the front fenders when you're driving them. And also the Type 3s were a little bit more expensive. The base on a Beetle back in that era, about 1971, was about, you could get one for about $2,000. The base on this was $2,450. And this one has about every option you could put on a car except for a sunroof. And I ended up paying about $3,200 for this car, which was a lot of money for a Volkswagen back in that era. People bought Volkswagens because they were inexpensive, so this car was built in July of '71, and I bought it in November, and I think it sat on the lot that long because it had one of the very expensive accessories, which was air conditioning. And air conditioning was an aftermarket put on by Volkswagen at the port of entry, and it was about almost a $400 option, so it really knocked the price up. But I was young and I didn't care how much things cost, so I went ahead and bought it anyway. And Type 3s were the first electronically and fuel injected engines. They started putting electronic fuel injection in Type 3s in 1968. This is the fourth iteration of that kind of system. Most people who have this type of car, they get intimidated by the fuel injection. They yank it off and put carburetors on, but when they're right, they're very, very reliable. They start real well, and they run real well. So this got all the original components of the fuel injection. The only thing that's ever been changed on the fuel injection are the injectors and the trigger points that are underneath the distributor that actually fire the injectors. So. This is a 65 Beetle. Although I didn't buy this one new, I know the story on this from day one. This car was purchased by a German citizen back in April of 1965. He lived in Hamburg, Germany. He was coming to the United States in a few months, so he bought an American spec car because he knew he was coming over here. He owned it. It was his daily driver from 65 to 85. And then the second owner, I'm friends with both owners. I know the first owner and the second owner. The second owner owned it from 1985 until 2008 when I bought it. He was actually, I met him because he was the mechanic that actually used to work on my Type 3. And so he had this car. First time I saw this car was in the late 80s. It was in pieces in his shop, and he finally got it together in the early 2000s. And I lusted over it a lot because it had a sunroof, is what I liked about it. And the original owner, actually, when he bought the car, he put hella lights, fog lamps in the front. But when it was shipped over here, somebody stole them, so he bought those. Those are Lucas on it now, and he bought those from Chile Motor in East Point right after he got over here with it. And it was also bought as a radio delete, but he put a little fancier radio right after he bought it too. So it has a radio, which is period for the time. And it also has a little accessory in the back, a little cover behind the back seat. That is actually a dealer install accessory. I think he got it right after he bought it, so that's something that's, I've never seen one. I guess they're around, but that's actually made for this car. It doesn't have an original engine. The first engine dropped the valve back in the late 80s, but the engine that's in it, the long block that was bought, is actually bought from a local Volkswagen dealer, and everything on the engine and the tin and everything came from the original engine. The engine's been out of course, and all the tin on the engine was powder coated. The only other non-stock thing about this car is the wheels. Of course, that's not the color they originally came. Those wheels have been powder coated.
She forgot all about the library like she told her old man now. And with the radio blasting goes cruising just as fast as she can now. And she'll have fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird away. Fun, fun, fun till her daddy takes the T-bird.
This is what you call a proverbial barn find. This car was, I know most of the history of this car, except for the first few months. This car was purchased by a lady in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1961. She was in her early 40s when she bought it, and she drove it or had it until she was in her 80s. She drove it so long that she finally had to park it because she couldn't drive it anymore. And so when she died in the early 2000s, she willed it to her brother, who had absolutely no interest in it. This car was never owned by anybody that would ever modify it, so it was a completely original car. It was all there, had minimal rust. It even had a good pan under the battery. It had a little rust in the wheel wells in the front, and the heater channel, a little bit in the back, but essentially it had very little rust. One aspect of this car, since I don't know about what happened, how it really got over here, I think it was probably what they call a gray market car. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, Volkswagen couldn't maintain there was just more demand than they could deliver for Volkswagen. So people would go to Europe and they would buy Volkswagens on the German market and bring them back over here and Americanize them, put the American bumpers on them, put the blinkers on them. That was the two main things they had to do. And they would sell them, and I think they had no trouble selling. The reason I think this is that way is because it has cloth seats. And cloth seats were, that was a European option. As I still had this car was pretty ragged when I found it on the interior, but it still had a lot of the cloth seats, and I managed to get some more cloth seats. Those are exact matches of the cloth seats that came in it. I did most of the taking it apart and putting back together. Somebody else helped me with the motor, and somebody else did the paint. As I was restoring it, another reason I think it was a gray market car, when I stripped it down to bare metal, I found that it had semaphores, or had a place for semaphores. Now, semaphores were not imported to the United States after the mid-50s. 1960 was the last year they were on a Volkswagen, but they would have been on a European car. But these had plates over them, but when I took the plates off, they actually had a little pocket in there for the semaphore, and they actually had the wiring for the semaphore in the hole where the semaphores go. And so even though Volkswagen never made a Volkswagen with blinkers and a semaphore, I went ahead and got some semaphores because they're a pretty neat little gadget to put on a car. They don't blink, they just come out and light. As I mentioned earlier, this car was complete when I found it. It had the original 36 horse stale air engine in it. It also had the split taste transaxle, and it still has both. But this particular engine is not the original engine, even though I still have that engine. This was a NOS engine that was built by Volkswagen in 1965 and put in a crate. It was actually an industrial engine that was used to run things like generators. But it was never used. It stayed in the crate till 1991. They brought it out, looked at it again. They said it was okay, put it back in the crate, and somebody bought it. My mechanic friend had a client that bought two of them back in early 2000s, and I would manage to get that from him. So this is a brand new engine. It has less than 200 miles. It had never been used.
happy, happy birthday, baby.